Emily, you want to lead us off?
Sure. Well, welcome everybody. So we did an ulcer webinar not too long ago, and some of the feedback that we got was that people wanted to know more about specifically what BioStar recommends in terms of BioStar products and what has worked and not worked for different BioStar customers. So Tigger has collected a panel of different types of people in the industry who all have different experiences. So if you guys just want to introduce yourself, we can start with Stephanie.
So I'm Stephanie Brown Beamer. I live in New York now and Wellington in the winter. Trainer. I train through Grand Prix. And let's see, I also am a certified bit and bridle fitter and travel a lot. I was introduced to Tigger, I don't know, 5 years ago, I think. And yeah, so that's a little bit about me. I'm a bronze, silver, gold medalist, L graduate. Yeah. And I'm sure I'll share a little bit about the horse that had me get pretty involved. So yeah, that's a little about me.
Cathy?
Oh, yes. Introduce myself. Well, I first want to talk about how my relationship with Tigger has started. I can't remember how many years ago it was that I was managing a small group of horses, and I was referred to Tigger through the vet. Actually sent her over. We had a horse that an older stallion that was struggling with some navicular circulation problems in his feet, and she proceeded to go through my grain room and ruin my life forever as she taught me to read labels. So that's kind of my introduction. That's my introduction to Tigger. She literally ruined my life, reading labels for my horses, my dogs, my cat, myself, blah, 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 blah. She taught me to read Bible. She's laughing. And I was at the tail end of that managing career and about to switch into the sports therapy. I went on to get some training in that and shifted into the racehorse world with a therapy group to really kind of learn my craft and understand all the different things available for sports therapy. And it was really there that the awareness became even greater. The large number of horses that are in a very controlled setting, 50 to 200 horses with the same trainer, same farrier, same surface, same feed, same everything, the controlled setting. It really just became apparent some of these horses' struggles, and started using some of Tigger's products on some of these horses. The trainers were open to that. See the dramatic difference in those young horses was really remarkable. And then to go on and then be kind of kicked out of the nest of that therapy group and out of my own, working on a lot of different disciplines and really working very closely with trainers who are struggling with these strange undiagnosed things. They become very frustrated trying to do the best for their horses. And I've developed some really nice relationships with trainers to help them kind of sort through this and to introduce them to Tigger and some of the things that she offers for healing. So that's how I keep getting stuck onto her panel is Tigger and I work very closely together. She's on speed dial constantly. So I'm happy to be here tonight.
Okay. Hi guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I am a dressage rider. I manage 9 horses at my farm, with all of everything that entails caring for a horse in a farm. So that's fun. And I acquired a really cool horse 2 years ago. He went to the Olympics in 2016 and placed 11th overall. He's really cool, but he's taught me a lot about managing not only a stallion, I've had a stallion in the past, but he's been everywhere. He's done everything, and he's very finicky. He's very sensitive. He's amazing, but he has taught me to, I knew that I had to manage his food because of his breed. With the Lusitanos and stuff, they're kind of sensitive to sugar. So I knew that he didn't get to have any Purina, like he couldn't have that. So right at the beginning, I found the Crypto Arrow kind of by myself, but also with a friend I met in Florida. So he's on that. And then this last spring, he started on Tigger supplements because he sort of was getting really funky at the shows, at the CDIs. It's like he has a lot of nerves. And I think he has nerves because of his big stage of competing for his whole life. And I didn't find that out until we started doing some of the bigger shows with him, that he was just so sensitive and so finicky, and so like his stomach gets upset and he can't perform kind of thing. So I have tried a pretty good array of Tigger's products with him, and it's going really well. And it's like been a total 180 with him. And so that's kind of, I guess, why I'm here. So yeah, and I have a couple other horses, but Sham's the star child, I guess.
So the way this is going to work this time is Tigger is going to kick us off and introduce everyone to the BioStar line of ulcer support products and kind of what led her and BioStar to create them, and some of the beta testing that went into it too. And then we'll kind of have everybody weigh in with their experiences. And then at the end, it's going to be opened up for questions. So if you guys do have questions that come up throughout it, you're welcome to type them in the chat. And if I know the answer, I'll just go ahead and answer you in the chat. But if it's a question for the panel, then we'll make sure we save it so that they can answer that at the end. And if you have any technical difficulties during this, you can either say something in the chat or you can email me. My email is just emily@biostarus.com, and I'll keep an eye on that just in case. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and kick off.
Should I say a little bit about my horse so people can maybe relate and then ask questions?
Yes,
or will Tigger?
I think Tigger is going to
address.
I'm going to start with sort of basic ulcer information, and I'm thinking you specifically with hindgut because that's its own.
Yes, special.
Yeah, very special hindgut story.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to start with an overview of ulcers, and then we'll start into the specific areas of ulcers from the panel's experience, and then what products. So there's basically, and I'm sure you all know this, there are gastric ulcers and hindgut ulcers, and they're very different. In a gastric ulcer can occur in the upper portion of the stomach. That's considered to be the easiest one to treat. When it happens, that's the top third of the stomach. The remaining 2/3, including the pyloric area, is called the glandular area of the stomach. That's the hardest ulcer, gastric ulcer to treat. And then as you pass through the small intestine, then you get into the colon and the hindgut, and that is a very different kind of ulcer known as acidosis or hindgut ulcers. What works for the squamous, which is the upper portion of the stomach ulcer, does not work on the hindgut. It also doesn't work on the glandular. So one of the problems that we've seen over time is that omeprazole, Gastrogard, UlcerGuard, for a long time was just kind of, we used it for everything. If your horse had an ulcer, they went on Gastrogard. it wasn't until we started to really scope horses more routinely that we started seeing, wow, it's not just in this upper third portion, it's the gastric ulcer can be down in the glandular area, and omeprazole does not heal that. Omeprazole needs either sucralfate or misoprostol, and it can take months to heal a glandular ulcer. The hindgut ulcer definitely doesn't respond at all to omeprazole. That generally takes sucralfate, misoprostol to reduce the inflammation in the hindgut. But I want you all to think about an ulcer. If you've never seen one on a scope, I'm going to give you a visualization. It's like a wound. Think of it as a wound in the stomach or in the colon. And in some horses, it's very red, very inflamed, very irritated. And sometimes the tissue around it is also swollen and irritated. And I imagine what it must be like for a horse to have a pyloric, which is the lower ulcer area, or the squamous, which is the upper gastric area. It must be a lot like having acid reflux. Have any of you ever had acid reflux where you eat something and suddenly you just get this horrible burning sensation? Well, that's what I imagine that the horses feel. The interesting thing is that the biology of the horse is they eat 20 hours a day, basically hay and forage, right? That 20 hours that they're eating, they produce like 10 gallons of saliva. That saliva has bicarbonate in it. Can any of you guess what bicarbonate does? So a bicarbonate neutralizes the acid. So one reason veterinarians are saying, make sure your horses, always got hay or forage or something to eat. It's the bicarbonate. I mean, first of all, it's good for the gut and the way the horse's GI tract is designed. But when they produce bicarbonate, it reduces the acid. So the squamous ulcer, which is the upper portion ulcer, it mostly comes from high acid production. But the glandular does not. The glandular is protected by mucus, and it's the mucus that under stress gets irritated, gets the skin. If you can imagine, you get a little wound and the skin breaks and you don't treat it and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. That's sort of what happens in the glandular area. So when a horse is eating all the time and eating grass or forage, they generally are producing enough bicarbonate to take care of the acid in the upper portion of the stomach. Where this gets different is when we feed commercial grain, it reduces the amount of saliva that horses produce. They don't produce as much saliva as they do when they're eating grass or forage. And the other function that we have to talk about is stress, because stress is the bottom line producer of ulcers. And I know it's not intuitive because horses out on pasture can get an ulcer. And you think, oh my gosh, my horse is eating outside. It's outside all the time, not being ridden. What kind of stress? How could this be stress? We cannot judge a horse's stress by human stress. So even a perfectly managed horse that has everything any horse could possibly need will still develop ulcers because their stress, which can be emotional or spiritual or physical, is different from ours. And some horses are very stoic and they don't let you know that they're stressed because they don't want to bother you. And some are very overt and they're like, I don't feel good, don't get on me, kick at your leg, don't tighten the girth. And they're more obvious and they're actually easier to read. So even though your horse may have the most perfect living conditions, does not mean that your horse does not experience stress. It could be stress of a pasture mate passing away, or being moved, or another horse coming into the stall next to them, or a new barn manager, or a new groom, or even getting on a trailer. The study is about 15 years old, but it was done in Lexington, and they took a group of, I don't know, 7 or 8 quarter horses, and they were all, living in a pasture, They put them on a trailer and drove a mile around the block, scoped them, and they all had ulcers from the 1 mile trailer ride. So with that in mind, we can't treat a squamous ulcer exactly the same way as a glandular, and we can't treat gastric the same way as hindgut. So to start with Stephanie, who has probably the best hindgut story ever, meaning it's a really good example of what happens. Hindgut ulcers are not easy to treat, and they take a very long time for a lot of horses. So Stephanie,
Yes.
take it away.
So I met Tigger about 5 years ago. I had lived in Utah for 20 odd years and moved back east to New York, and had spent 2 seasons in Florida with my horse Griff, who is a Frisian cross. He's a Frisian appendix quarter horse cross that I actually bought him to be a lesson horse, and he never became a lesson horse. He became my horse. He's just a super fun little guy. He'd never lived in humidity. Been to 26 states, been to regionals from California to New York and everywhere in between, nationals. He's a cool little guy. And second season in Florida, I came home in April and super lethargic, really lethargic. And he's a little bit tough. He's tough in the heat because of the Frisian in him. But really lethargic. Like, he loves cavaletti work, and he couldn't even pick up his back legs. So I was working with a vet who came up to New York every 2 weeks, and she was up, took blood, went home right afterwards, called me and said, do not get on that horse. And he didn't show up like your typical hindgut horse that most vets would say, here's the signs and symptoms. He didn't lose weight. He didn't stop eating. He's not a food-driven horse. I know the Frisian people think that, but he's not. Never's been a good drinker. And he was in bad shape. And it took 8 months of calling vets all over the country and working with different vets. My vet, they thought for a while he had leukemia. And I finally called my vet back in Utah and just said, would you listen to what's going on? And she said, it sounds like hindgut. Meanwhile, no one I'd worked with had said that. And the blood work, his red blood cell count, they immediately treated him for stomach ulcers, and the red blood cell count came back up, but the white blood cell count didn't. And it was bad. It was scary, bad. And so we ended up taking him off of all feed. She's like, he's bleeding someplace, obviously, and he can't process hay. He can't process anything. So her suggestion was put him on senior feed, soaked. And it was the first time in 8 months he got 18 pounds of senior a day. And it was the first time that he actually started to turn around a little bit. It got it so bad. The vets that I had worked with, they finally said, you just have to get back on him. And I'd get back on him, and spooky, scary spooky. And he is not a spooky horse. And walking 10 minutes on the buckle, the next day he'd colic. He went to Cornell, spent 4 days there, and you got to get back on him. It didn't work. He'd colic every time I'd get back on him. And so spooky, he was unrideable. And so this vet out in Utah, Karen Blake, she told me, you know, this is what we're going to do. And in the meantime, my barn owner had some dealings with Tigger, and she's like, Steph, maybe, you know, maybe call Tigger. I'm like, I'll try anything. And I called Tigger, and that was the beginning of his life again. Oh, it's gonna make me cry. We took him off of all hay. He no longer could process hay. And she's like, we need to get him off the crack candy, and meaning the senior. And we put him on first just alfalfa pellets soaked. That's all he could really process. And started him on, I can't remember the first thing we started him on, but it was slow going. And I would talk to her every week, like every 5 to 6 days. I was terrified. And just slowly put him onto soaked mini cubes, because the more chopped up something is, the easier it was for him to process. And we just had to let his hindgut heal. And, you know, I mean, I have the luxury of seeing lots of people every year, and I see thousands of horses due to my bit and bridle fitting around the country. And I mean, I can pick out an hindgut ulcer horse like nobody's business. And I'm like, hey, call Tigger. Whether or not she likes it, I just give them her phone number. And I mean, she's helped a lot of horses that I know around the country. And so with Griff, anyway, I mean, he's on Bioflora, Theracom, Circuvate, and he's a little bit of a, besides just the hindgut ulcers, you know, he's half Frisian and he's doing Grand Prix. So he needs all the help he can get, because we go to Florida still. Optimum GI, that was a nice little thing that we could add to his diet last year. This winter, he didn't travel so well commercially. It's the first time he's ever traveled commercially, was going down to Florida last year. And he didn't handle it very well. I've been the one to transport him all over this country, and I no longer want to do that. So when I got down there, you know, lots of fluids, and immediately called Tigger, and we tried him on the beta test, the what do you call it now? The Theraguard. I will always call it beta test base. And I mean, it did wonders. And the other horse I had down there is a big 16.2, 16.3 PRE, and, you know, metabolic prone. And we used that with him quite a bit this summer, or this past winter. And, you know, I'm diligent and very careful. I think when you go through something like this, when you almost lose a horse to hindgut, and I mean, he was on death's door, and Tigger definitely saved his life, because nobody around the country could help him that I could find. And I'm very diligent about the hindgut at this point with all of my training horses. Nobody gets a stitch of grain in anything. I'm careful with my treats. I want no binding agents. I want nothing, no wheat middlings. My husband's a distiller, so my cousin is the farmer for the distillery, and I'm very careful about grains. We know grains. And I don't feed any grain to my horses. It's just not worth it. And my horses look like $1 million. And I still feed the soak cubes, you know, steadily. We got him back on hay, but I still feed those soak cubes to everybody. And it's my way of, one, making sure everybody gets water, because that's terrifying when your horse doesn't drink. And two, it helps me manage weight well. And the other thing, going back to Griff, when he was pretty down and out, when that last season we were in Florida, he stopped sweating. And I think that was due to the hindgut. And I've been told by numerous vets that there's no correlation, which I think is kind of crazy. There has to be a correlation. You know, our sympathetic nervous system, when we vomit, we sweat. I just think that it has to be correlated. Yeah, so Griff's on quite a few BioStar products for energy because of who he is and the level that he's working. And I consult with Tigger a lot because he's doing something that physically he wasn't bred to do, you know, and he's only 16 hands, but he almost weighs 1,400 pounds. So he's a pretty heavy guy. He doesn't look heavy, but that Frisian bone is very, very dense. And so he can use all the help he can get to keep his energy up without getting him too hot, because he can be a little spicy.
So let me talk a little bit about hindgut ulcers and how BioStar approaches hindgut ulcers. And the first thing to understand is sometimes hindgut ulcers are the result of omeprazole, meaning long-term use of omeprazole, meaning months and months. The body needs that acid to break up food. So over time, as you use omeprazole, which is an acid blocker, it's a proton pump inhibitor, the body still needs, it's a fermentation vat is really what the GI tract of a horse is. Some of the sugars and starches, because there's not enough acid, don't get digested in the small intestine and they go into the large intestine. When the large intestine gets starch and sugar, which is designed to break up fiber, it kills off the beneficial bacteria in the hindgut. And that's acidosis. So you've got the unfriendly bacteria proliferating off the sugar and starch and the beneficial bacteria dying. Over time, it also becomes an irritation, what we know as a hindgut ulcer. There's inflammation in the colon. So there are horses that need grains for energy. You just don't want to make it a huge or large part of the diet, because if those grains don't get digested in the small intestine, which is small, it's called the small intestine because it's pretty little, and they get into the hindgut, you start this hindgut acidosis and eventually ulceration. So the medical approach is to use sucralfate. I'm assuming you all know what sucralfate is. It coats the GI tract. It's very safe. It's one of the, I think, the most benign medications for ulcers, whether they be gastric or hindgut. And then the vet will often recommend misoprostol. Now, misoprostol is a really good drug, but you don't want to use it all the time. And I say that because it's a synthetic prostaglandin. Prostaglandins are hormone-like substances. The best reference I can give you, with the exception of our male friends who are watching, when you have PMS, that is a proliferation of prostaglandins. And there are two types of prostaglandins. Prostaglandin 1 is the anti-inflammatory prostaglandin. Prostaglandin 2 is the pro-inflammatory. So, for instance, when you have PMS and you feel bloated and icky and yucky and crampy, that's an elevation of prostaglandin 2. Misoprostol is a synthetic prostaglandin 1. So if you give that to a horse, you are reducing the pro-inflammatory prostaglandins. But the really cool thing is, in nature, there is a natural prostaglandin, and it's in hemp seed oil. Not hemp oil, it has to be hemp seed oil. And it's called gamma-linoleic acid, GLA. The body converts it to prostaglandin 1. the anti-inflammatory prostaglandin. So the routine, if a vet is treating a hindgut ulcer and I'm asked to step in, I take the hay away, maybe 1 or 2 flakes a day. The reason is we want to give the hindgut a rest as we're treating it. Hay has a lot of lignin. You know, that's lignin is the same thing that makes a tree stand tall. It's the stemmy elements of hay. That's irritating to the hindgut, all that lignin and cellulose that the horse really can't digest. So we go to soaked hay cubes, we go to chopped hay, we go to hay pellets. And I mean, I've had some hindgut horses that were fed every 2 hours with a bucket of soaked cubes. And because we want them to be eating all the time, but we just don't want them eating a lot of hay. And they can have as much grass as they want. So we do that for 30 days. And as they're weaning off of misoprostol, we add hemp seed oil. Because when you start misoprostol, whatever the level that the vet recommends, you have to slowly wean the horse. Otherwise, if you just stopped it, the inflammation would return rather quickly. So it's a very slow process, and you add hemp seed oil, and now the body is making more prostaglandin 1. We also use something called BioFlora, and it's our cooling probiotic. And a cooling probiotic, in Ayurvedic terms, foods are warming, cooling, neutral. When you've got fire in the gut, which is what an ulcer is in Ayurvedic terms, you want to cool it down. So BioFlora represents 5 strains of cooling, meaning from milk, probiotic strains. But we also added something called mannan oligosaccharides. Say that fast 3 times. It's known as MOS. MOS regulates the pH of the hindgut. Why is that important? If you have hindgut acidosis, do you think that the pH is already not well adjusted? Yeah, because otherwise that the bad probiotic strains would not be proliferating. So you want to get the pH of the hindgut back to normal, and that allows for the inherent healthy, beneficial probiotics to thrive. Any questions on hindgut ulcers? Yeah, Stephanie.
I do want to say that he was on misoprostol and scrofate. Like, I wasn't not using the vets, but we needed to address the diet. So
yes, yeah. It goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
Angela, do you want to unmute and ask your hindgut questions to Stephanie and Tigger? Or I can ask them. She says, are there any definitive tests out yet to determine if your horse has hindgut ulcers? If not, what are the basic symptoms, please?
Okay, so there is, Succeed has developed a test that some vets are using. And I think that they look at fecal material and see how much blood or they get into the test. I know some vets use that and really like that test. I personally like the ultrasound. I think it's really precise. They're not obviously going through the anal tract to ultrasound. They ultrasound outside on the right dorsal colon area of a horse. There you get a really good read of how much inflammation is there. So those are the 2 tests that I know of. Cathy, Stephanie, do you know of any other hindgut ulcer tests?
I think that's about it. When I was going through this, it was Succeed and the ultrasounding.
Cathy?
Hi.
Oh,
No, I'm here. I often find that external obliques are very tight if they have a hindgut ulcer, or QL can be very tight. So it does manifest in the muscle structure. So that's what I find is those two muscles seem to be tighter than you would normally find. And
Kathy,
that's usually what,
where would
you know, when
somebody,
I'm working on a horse.
where would somebody find those muscles? Where exactly are they?
It'd be easier if I had a picture, but not on a horse. You know what I mean? It's like to really, it kind of comes off the point, what we call the point of the hip, which is really tubercocci, and it comes down, and it's a very large muscle, and it comes down around the abdomens, but kind of below the rib cage, you know, more toward the abdomen region.
Okay.
Kind of the large stabilizing muscles that stabilize the lumbar sacral junction where, you know, the lumbar spine is. And I often find that it seems to be protective splinting is what I find, that it's abnormally tight. And so a lot of times when people, you know, give the description that, you know, Stephanie, you gave a great description, and I'd love Stephanie to just say that one more time, because when she started to say how horse was feeling and acting, people tell me that, and then I kind of go to those areas and I'm suspicious when I hear that, and then I go to those areas and feel, you know, tighter than normal. And that's when I start to say to them, you know, you might be dealing with a hindgut ulcer here. And I refer them to the vet, you know, to do some of the diagnostic testing. But that was so great. If you could just quickly, if you have a minute, to just kind of run down the symptoms that you were finding that really made you think there was a problem here.
So super lethargic, and he's not ever that way. He loves cavaletti work. So I was like, maybe I just didn't know what was wrong. So I thought, well, we'll do cavaletti. It's something he loves to do. And he physically could not pick his hind legs up over the cavaletti. And he just got super, super spooky. And in hindsight, I wonder if he had been dealing with these for longer than I realized, because as a younger horse, when I showed, he loved to show. Like, he loved to show. It was fun. He loved to go. And I'd say once I moved back east and I was showing, he got a little bit tense and explosive. And that was never his MO when we showed. Like, that was his place. And I just wonder if he had been dealing with them for a couple years before it really got substantially worse. The boarding situation that I had in Florida that year was I know this seems kind of crazy to some people, but it was just didn't have a good feeling. It was a very tense atmosphere, a lot of personalities, and I do know he is very sensitive to his boarding situation. This past year, I was in a situation where he stopped eating, and as soon as I moved him, put him in the stall, he ate. So I think horses can be very sensitive to their surroundings, and I think he just is ultra sensitive, but he got very explosive. And the part that baffled me was when I was told to get back on and ride, and on the buckle for 10 minutes walking, trying to survive it because I was death defying. He was spooking at everything. And the next day he'd colic, and he did it 3 times. And I don't think that was a coincidence, you know?
And that's, the tricky thing about hindgut is every horse kind of has a different, MO on hindgut. Frequent colics are, to me, definitely a warning sign. But the same is when you get excessive diarrhea or what I call leaky gut.
He never had any of that,
No,
but
no,
some
he didn't.
do. Yeah.
But some do, and their manure just changes, and it's very loose. And no matter what you do, it just stays loose. I mean, no matter what you try. So those are two signs that, and temperament, when their attitude changes, and when I walk into a horse's stall, I'm immediately letting them know that, you know, friend, peace, friend, not foe, and seeing how they react to me. And the hindgut ulcer horses, and to some degree the gastric ulcer horses, are very protective.
Yeah. I think too, it's, you have to really have a vet that you're very, that takes you seriously, because not every horse is going to show up in the stereotypical hindgut ulcer diagnostic way. You know, he never stopped eating, not a single bit. He didn't lose weight. So the vets were kind of like, it's not hindgut. You know, he still ate. So I think that you have to make sure that you work with somebody who takes you seriously, you know, and is willing to look outside the box a little bit.
And we're seeing way more hindgut problems,
which is interesting.
We're seeing horses with, and Cathy can really speak to this, that not only have gastric ulcers, they also have hindgut ulcers.
Yeah.
So that becomes incredibly challenging. Cathy, you want to speak to that? Our dual ulcer horses?
That have the hindgut and the glandular, and the difference between what I find.
Yeah,
that's always a tricky question. And I agree with Tigger about the change of personality for sure. Sometimes it can be dramatic. I often see horses, you know, at competition. So I do quite a bit of farm work, and you know, if I find that at the farm it's usually more subtle, but those horses, like you said, once they're put on a trailer, it is amazing how just a simple trailer ride will kind of bring to the surface whatever they're struggling with the most. And the change of personality is usually pretty dramatic, or after, you know, maybe the first day I check them at the show, it's not bad, but as the days go on into the week, it can really come to the surface. And again, the hindgut, I typically find that, you know, hind quarter, lower lumbar, QL, external oblique, but the other ulcers, they seem to manifest more in the girth area. And one of the questions I always ask them is, how are they to girth? And typically a horse that is girthy, typically is not a straight hindgut horse. It typically is more the, you know, forward portion of the stomach is involved. And through kind of the thoracic region of the back will be very, very tight. A lot of times you'll find a tightness in the withers, and in the neck, like base of the neck, you'll find a lot of tightness. They're bracing. And it can often be confused with foot issues. And I think that's one of the things that's, you know, that a lot of vets go to the feet because it seems like the most obvious thing. And maybe, you know, like they say at the racetrack, what hits the ground first. So, but it's typically, I find that with foot issues, you don't get the girth issue. That girth issue is really specific to those, you know, stomach ulcers. And there is kind of, when I palpate the sternum back a little farther, you can get a definitive response from the forward ulcers and the pyloric ulcers as palpate on that sternum area, kind of where it would be in the stomach. So kind of a little farther back on the sternum is usually where I get a reaction for a pyloric ulcer. And usually base of the neck is more of the forward stomach ulcers when I'm palpating muscle-wise, if that's helpful to people.
That's interesting.
I think this
So the muscles
whole,
really reflect that.
I think this whole process going through this with this horse has taught me to look a little deeper at everything and really try to utilize the people around me, you know, acupuncture, chiropractic, and physio. They're so receptive to things like this that just can solidify what you might be thinking or wondering if that's what's going on. You know, I've refined I think we learn along the way, you know, it's all a journey, and it's really refined my ability to really read my horses and utilize my team around me a little bit more.
Before we get too far from talking about Stephanie's horse, are the Succeed and ultrasound definitive tests? And once you were keyed into that it might be hindgut ulcers, did he test positive?
You know, I never did use the Succeed because I had people telling me do it. I still have the Succeed test in my refrigerator. And by the time that I don't know, we started treating him and it was pretty confirmed that that's what it was. And there were people on both sides of the fence with the Succeed. So I just kind of was like, we'll just rally on, you know, it was going in a positive direction. So I didn't use the Succeed test because, you know, he had, for a while, they thought he had leukemia.
I do recommend if you suspect hindgut, if you've got a body work,
yeah,
comes up and sort of verifies, yeah, there's something going on in the hindgut, get the ultrasound.
Yeah.
Or the Succeed. The ultrasound is just, it's so, you can see it.
And he was ultrasounded, and at that point we already suspected that, and yes, it did confirm that. Yeah.
Stephanie, you might want to look at the chat because there's a question for you.
Yeah. So Olga asked is that what?
Oh
What?
Yeah, if you don't mind typing, what do you feed? And I'm going to move on.
I'm on an iPad. I can't really type in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a little beyond my scope of abilities.
Okay, so what do you feed?
Alfalfa pellets, cool stance for my Griff horse, and then a lot of supplements because of who he is, and you know, we need to work with his muscle recovery because he's Afrasian and working at the level, you know, lots of different things. But the base of his diet is alfalfa pellets and cool stance. And he gets camelina oil now. And then I have the big PRE. He's just on alfalfa pellets. So every horse is just tweaked a little differently according to Tigger. And I have the luxury of being in Florida, and she comes and sees them all. So, yeah, but that's the base of my diet. And then depending, you know, I had another horse, he was on Renew Gold with the alfalfa pellets. So we just try to really make sure that they all have a really balanced diet and getting what they need to perform at the level that they are.
And healthy.
Yes.
Okay, gastric ulcers. I'm sure everybody has had an experience with it. So let's talk about squamous and glandular. Glandular being the most difficult to treat. Omeprazole is the gold standard for treating squamous. It does the trick. Stops the production of acid, allows the squamous to heal. What you can do to support the neutralization of acid is make sure your horse is eating hay and forage 20 hours a day. Alfalfa is really good because it's high in calcium, so that's a neutralizer. BioStar has a product called Tummies. Now, this is a little cookie. There you are, Emily. So the one time in 24 hours when the horse is either sleeping or eating is when we ride them. That is one time that the stomach is unprotected, right? Because the horse isn't eating while we're riding. So what Tummies does is it provides a microcrystallized aloe. This is not an aloe that you can buy at Costco or Whole Foods or Trader Joe's. It's a medical grade aloe. It costs $250 a pound. It's medical grade. It's used in hospitals. Why is that important? Because medical grade aloe works like sucralfate. It coats the GI tract. So Tummies is something that you give. It's in a little bar. It's really kind of cute. It's got the aloe in it. It's got cabbage in it. Cabbage is one of the richest sources of glutamine, the amino acid, and the body uses glutamine to heal intestinal mucosa. So, oh, good, you're breathing. Okay, so that's Tummies, and it's designed to be used before you ride. So when you tack up, you give your horse 2 Tummies, and by the time you're finished grooming and getting ready to go to the ring or go for a ride, the 30 minutes that it's taken, this is now going into effect. And it just helps protect the horse from the acid that is produced when they're not eating. And this is a normal biology of equine. So when they were wild and they were eating and the mountain lion came, the adrenaline kicks in, the stomach acid increases, and they run. Well, when we ride them, and then they would run away from the mountain lion, and then they would go back to eating. But when we ride them and train them, we are trotting, cantering, maybe a little bit of walk, then trotting, cantering, doing this, jumping this, da-da-da. The stomach acid only goes back to normal at walk. So Tummies is just a great way to protect the GI tract when you're riding, and the horses love it. So it's just a good thing. I think it's just a good thing to have in your pocket. Give to your horse before you ride, and maybe if he's been a good boy, he gets 1 or 2 afterwards. And it's way better than sugar, because sugar is just going to increase inflammation. So any questions about, yes, Tummies are safe for a Cushing's horse. Yes, they are. Thank goodness. And they're dehydrated. This is a very different way of producing a supplement rather than it being cooked, which destroys all the raw enzymes in whole food. We just dehydrate it, meaning that in these commercial dehydrators, fans are blowing all the time on the bars, evaporating the water because it's moisture that causes mold. And the temperature is set at 125 degrees, which I like bath water hotter than that. So that's Tummies, and Tummies does the entire gastric. So that's Tummies. So if we're dealing with glandular ulcers that are the most difficult to treat, they're difficult because the mucosa has become compromised. And a study at Haggard, the big Lexington clinic, they did a study using pectin, like in jam, but that's not what they used, and lecithin and polysaccharides with hyaluronic acid. And they did this study, and they had an unbelievable, like 87% response. Now, they weren't just doing glandular. It was both squamous and glandular. And I looked at this study and I went, oh, that's really interesting. What interested me was that the polysaccharides were isolated, meaning it wasn't in a whole food form. I thought, I wonder what would happen if you used pectin that was medical grade, and if you used polysaccharides that were in traditional Chinese mushrooms, because traditional Chinese mushrooms are one of the richest sources of the beta glucans, which is a type of polysaccharide. So I started experimenting, and as anybody who knows me, especially the people at BioStar, I'm like a mad scientist, and I will go down 1,000 rabbit holes to try to figure something out. And we started with a very difficult horse, a Grand Prix jumper that had been suffering from glandular ulcers for a year, and on every medicine known to man, and every treatment known to, and nothing worked. And the owner and I, between us, we went, this is really interesting. And we started experimenting with the levels of pectin and the levels of polysaccharide. In 60 days, he healed. And that was when I went, okay, I think we're on to something. He has been on it now a year and a half and has had no recurrence. And he was unrideable. So to make a very long story short, we, after testing lots and lots of horses and doing pain for the scoping so that we could see the horse before and after, we brought out TheraGuard. TheraGuard does treat squamous with a high level of seaweed extract, which is high in calcium. But the key is it's pharmaceutical grade pectin that they use in hospitals to treat wounds. That was so profound to me, because think of what that ulcer looks like in the stomach. It's a wound. And depending on the severity, it can be like so red that you hurt by looking at it on ultrasound. You physically feel the pain. This is what hospitals use to treat wounds. And I went, okay, 99% pure apple pectin is what they use at hospitals on wounds. I think we need this for an ulcer formula. Then we added lecithin. Here's the key with the mucosa. The mucosa itself is a phospholipid. So when you add more phospholipids to the mucosa, it helps them heal. So we have the protection of the pectin, we have the actual healing mechanism of the lecithin, and the polysaccharides, which the mucosa use to regenerate. And I think that combination of medicinal mushrooms, the pharmaceutical pectin, the lecithin, has made this TheraGuard really so, and I say remarkable because it's remarkable to me that food like this can be have such a profound effect on horses. And I'm going to let Mary jump in here, because even though I'm not sure whether we were dealing with glandular or squamous or both, Mary, maybe you'd like to tell your story.
Well, where should we start? So my lovely beast, like I said, he's competed all over the world in the CDIs, all over. He pretty much has a passport that's more colorful than mine will ever be. And he kind of went into the CDI ring, and he would, with me, now keep in mind, we could go to any schooling show, we could go to any like class A rated show, with a whip, without a whip, with spurs, with no spurs. It really didn't matter. Snaffle, double, didn't matter. We could go to different clinics, like everywhere, and hack, whatever, he was totally fine. Well, he went into the CDI rings or anything that like looked like a CDI venue, the horse would completely shut down. He wouldn't piaffe, he wouldn't passage, he wouldn't do ones, he wouldn't do anything. He would basically do like everything he could to sort of like bum through the test and then just like ignore me completely. Like it was like, and then he did another thing that he started doing was he would go in the warm-up ring and he would get so nervous that he would poop like 5 or 6 times, just like in 15 minutes of a warm-up. And he was just like, and it wasn't that he was so explosive or spooky. It was literally like you have a little kid and they just start going, la, 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 I can't hear you. And he wasn't spooking, like he wasn't doing anything that was like naughty, but he just like wouldn't do dressage at all. And I mean, I don't know. He is a stallion, so like it could be stallion games. And then I talked to all these different people, all these different trainers, and they're like, well, you just have to beat him. You just have to beat him into submission. And I'm like, well, how? Like, how do you beat your horse into submission? So that like didn't work either. We didn't beat him. So then I was like, well, I don't know what to do. So I called Sally, and this was after we had gone through the situation of he sort of like got these ulcers in his mouth, which like made no sense. The hay didn't change, nothing changed. We were in Florida, weird things happen in Florida. That's pretty much all I can explain it with. I have no idea. But I was at a show and the ulcers in his mouth were like around his incisors. It wasn't from the bit. He doesn't eat out of a hay bag. He eats off the ground. It didn't make any sense. So then I called Sally, and Sally's like, you have to call Tigger. She'll fix it. And I was like, what? Okay, whatever. So I called Tigger, and she's like, so you have to have this kind of honey and this kind of honey, and you have to do it this like number of times per day, put it on top and feed him this and feed him that. And I was like, okay. And I tried it, and not like, I'm not kidding you, within 3 days at the show, the horse's mouth ulcers that were like breaking open and bleeding, I thought we were going to get eliminated, were totally fine. So I kept him on the colostrum and the bioflora and then moved on with life, and he was still like doing the cotton in his ears thing. 4 months later, we finally figured it out, which turns out it's like he has stage fright. So I think what happens is before I put him on the trailer, like we said, the whole 1 mile thing, and keep in mind, like he goes on his own trailer, same trailer every time. I'm the only one that drives him. I'm the only one that takes care of him. So like nothing changes. But I think as soon as he goes to get on the trailer, he gets a little bit nervous. But then if we show up at a clinic or like a regular old show or something that like doesn't give him that same level of pressure, he's fine. But where it's like a CDI type atmosphere where it's like one ring and the warm-up ring is totally separate, and it's like sort of like not stadium seating, but like the ring is very much so just the ring. That's what makes him nervous. So I tried the InZen, which made me really nervous at first to try it because, and I'm not sure why, but I think I was worried that it was somehow like gonna not give me enough horse, because as most people know, the Grand Prix, they don't just decide to do. It's sort of a lot. So we put him on that, and that I think helped a lot. He was a lot more of a horse, but it was still like that stallion game type mentality. And I tried the InZen, like we started it at the show, which I think there's a difference between starting it 2 days before you put your horse on a trailer and starting something like once you get to the show. So then for regionals a couple weeks ago, I also tried the TriGuard in addition to the InZen, and I started it for about 4 days before we left, and I gave him a whole tube every morning. And then if I showed like in the afternoon, I gave him an entire tube of both. And he gets star power too, just because like he's a Lusitano, he's an older horse. The Grand Prix is not exactly super easy. And the horse has done a complete 180. He went to the exact same showgrounds 3 weeks later and remembered how to piaffe. He remembered how to do his wands, and he took his cotton out of his ears. So I think it's pretty, like, it's been a pretty interesting experience. And like, he gets free choice hay, he gets turnout as much as he wants. Well, he gets like 12 hours to turn out a day if it's nice. We live in Minnesota, so it depends on the weather, but he gets as much turnout as he wants. He gets free choice hay, he gets his crypto arrow and his renew gold. But I think, like, for his future of his showing career, the Tri-Guard and the Inzen together is going to be what he's going to do, period, in the story, because it made a huge difference. He didn't have that like nasty poop. He pooped like a normal horse. Like, and again, we were literally at the same facility 3 weeks later. So I would say that would be my experience with it. And
So the Tri-Guard is the paste version of TheraGuard. I'm just explaining what the program you're on. So this is our alternative to having to rely on omeprazole.
Oh, yes. Let me just add. So
Yes.
at all of his other previous horse shows, including the ones he put cotton in his ears and the ones that he actually did the Grand Prix, he was on an entire tube of UlcerGuard that would start multiple days before I would ever leave. So, which is when a few, like, during festival, Tigger was like, well, maybe the UlcerGuard isn't doing necessarily what it's intended to be doing, and that's all. Let's just leave it at that, because we don't really, like, I didn't scope him, I didn't do any testing. I basically have treated him just based on the way that he behaves, because he either piaffes and does his ones, or he literally stands there and does nothing, which is pretty frustrating, if you might understand. But so for regionals, which was the only show that I did the Tri-Guard and the Inzen, I did not do any UlcerGuard at all whatsoever, and had absolutely no ulcery. He's not girthy either, which is weird. And he never was. So I don't know. I don't know that I will use UlcerGuard for the preventative reason much in the future because of that with him, because it didn't seem to necessarily help me at all.
Yeah, I suspect he's got more irritation when he is under stress in the glandular portion, in the pyloric area, and that's why Tri-Guard works so well. So Tri-Guard is TheraGuard in a paste, and again, it's when you ship, when the horse is under extra stress. It's good to have TheraGuard, mess these things up, Tri-Guard around. In dealing with stress, there are a lot of different ways to address stress, and Mary was addressing, her horse is not an overt stressor, he's an internalizer. And we have two ways of approaching stress with horses, because not all horses act the same. Some are very expressive. I call them the attention deficit disorder horses. They bolt, they spook, they imagine something that never was there before. They're unhappy, they're reactive. So they need something that increases serotonin in their brain, reduces the cortisol, and keeps their tummy happy. We call that Xanax. For the horse that's the internalizer, which is what Mary's horse is more like, and I would say Griff. Yeah, Stephanie's horse. These are the horses that might stand in the back of the stall, or react to something that they normally walk by every day, and then all of a sudden, because they're stressed, they're like, ah, and that bucket has been there for 3 months. So these horses are the ones that are very stoic. And so we approach them by actually increasing the neurotransmitters for, thinking and courage and, confidence, and while also addressing the cortisol issue, which is the result of stress, and the gut. So BioStar's approach to stress is we just don't approach it one way, which is, oh, a horse has got stress, let's calm them. Well, the brain, the gut, and the adrenal gland, which produces the cortisol, they're all connected. It's an axis. And the interesting thing is serotonin, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. I describe it as, eating a good candy bar that gives me serotonin. So it's really a nice feeling. It's actually 90% of serotonin is produced in the gut. So a horse that has ulcers is going to produce less serotonin. So to address stress is to address cortisol, the gut, which will result in the brain. Does that make sense to everybody? So we have a daily stress supplement called Theracom, and it addresses the brain, the gut, and the adrenal gland. And that's for the horse that is under chronic stress. Maybe they're confined for layup. Maybe they show a lot. And they're anticipatory, they're nervous about training, you're teaching them something new, something's changed in the barn, then you would want to use Theracom. Cathy, you have a lot of experience with BioStar's ulcer formulas and Theracom.
Yes, I do, Tigger. Yes, I do. I had the privilege to be involved with many horses on the beta test when you were first developing the Theragard. And what I really love that you described, Tigger, is how I love that you described that you were using the research that Haggard did that showed an 80% improvement. I mean, that's remarkable. And how you kind of stumbled into, taking the research that they had done. Well, stumbled. That you took their research and you went down the rabbit hole like you always do. And I love how you described to everybody how instead of using a synthetic product, which, that's mostly what we have available, that you were able to find food. And I love how you described that most of the ingredients that you use are medical grade, things they actually use in hospitals, whether it's, the aloe or that these are actually things that they're using to heal humans. And that you have brought that into the equine world and have applied these, super potent remedies is what I call it. That what I have found is the absorption rate of what you have developed is so much, number one, faster and effective than anything else out there on the market is what I have seen. And I see a lot, I come across everything. And the horses that were on the Theragard, it was remarkable how quickly the majority of them improved, temperament-wise, body-wise, and even the ones that were being scoped. There were a few persistent ones that needed more than 1 month. And I also found there was a real management issue in that product, that because it's such a volume of powder, the ones that were not improving were typically, the horses just weren't eating it. that they,
Yeah.
I would check with the grooms, or that they were getting put in the feed bucket, but the horses, because it was such a volume of powder, that they weren't actually eating it. And I, now as somebody who kind of comes in and out, I have a lot of different ways to help people find a way to make it more palatable, especially in the beginning when they are very uncomfortable. And I actually had one groom tell me that he put it in alfalfa cubes and he called it a smoothie, and I've taken that from him and have shared that with other people. But that product has been really remarkable. The horses that have had persistent issues with their stomachs, that have had many traditional Gastriguard, sucralfate, all the other, there's a lot of products on the market. And what I find is it's not that the other products on the market aren't good. They're just not as potent as yours. That's what I've come to understand. The rate of absorption and the rate of healing with your products seems to be much faster than anything else I have found. And without a lot of these side effects, as Gastriguard, creating an environment for Hindgut ulcers later on, or bone bruising because the lack of, the blocking of absorption of calcium, all that. I haven't seen any of those adverse effects to the formulas you've come up with. And I love how people have talked about what they've used, and how you brought up the TheraCalm in connection with stomachs, and the whole idea that the formula that Mary gave us with the I think it was the Zen and the Triguard, Mary.
Yeah.
I think that's what you were saying. The double tubes, because I have, I'm there at the competitions, kind of on the front line, and we're scrambling, and that's what I'm finding is very intuitive trainers and owners and riders that I work with, and they're all incredibly intuitive about their own horses, and I encourage them to be intuitive with the horses, are trying different combinations. And it seems like what I have found is for the treatment of the ulcers, the 30 days of TheraGuard, 30 to 60, some people keep them on longer. And then for the kind of the performance stuff, I love that Mary said that the combination, because I'm finding this also with several different trainers, riders, the combination of the TriGuard and the Zen, like an hour before you show, is amazing, because it's really amazing. And Tigger, I don't think you had any idea that was going to happen. I think it was kind of a byproduct of people. No, and I think that's the brilliance of what you have to offer, is that people are using these different things in combination, and they're incredibly intuitive with their horses. And I have found that a lot, that the TriGuard used like an hour before you ride, or an hour before you show, or an hour before they get on the trailer, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
I'm finding remarkable results with that. The TheraGuard for the treatment of the ulcers for 30 or 60 days, that has been remarkable. The only weak link is getting, the management issue, actually finding a way to make sure they're eating all of it. And I'm really on that now, to really follow up and make sure to tell people that, check the feed tub, make sure they're really eating it, fool with, how you're feeding it to get them to eat it. Because once they start eating it and they're feeling better, you're off and running. But in the beginning, it can be a little bit tricky. And then, of course, my favorite magic bullet combination is the TheraCalm. I mean, to me, the TheraCalm in combination is like the icing on the cake. It's like the pretty little flowers. There it is. It's like the pretty little flowers you put on a cake. That's like the TheraCalm. That and I love how you explained, because there's so many products that are just, gut to brain, gut to brain, gut to brain. There's nothing out there that does the adrenal. And I literally can feel the poison in their body from the cortisol. I literally can feel that. When I put my hands on a horse and they've had a lot of stress, I can feel it. And when those horses are on that Theracom, their muscles are softer, they're more relaxed, they're exchanging oxygen faster through the muscles. There's actually a study out, and I can't remember, you may know about it, that if a horse's biome is healthy, it actually softens the fascia in their body. That's amazing, right? And that's what I feel. That's what I'm feeling. When horses' stomachs are healthy, the adrenals are not shooting and pumping cortisol and poisoning their body, they feel completely different and they perform better. And that's the whole racehorse thing. Those things are oxygen machines.
Yeah.
And, whether it's a racehorse, a 3-day horse, a dressage horse, a show jumper, a hunter, and pony hunters, there's somebody on here now listening, I've done a lot of work with, and she's got hunters and a nice pony, and we've been fooling with it, and you've been working with her, and the change is remarkable. I mean, it's really, and she's very intuitive with her horses, and these are the people that seem to really take to your work. And I know you encourage that too. And so the combination of those things are really amazing. And Emily's got the Optimum GI for the maintenance, and that's the gold standard. That they all should just be on that, and then you just can layer on to it whatever you need. And that's what I love. They all, because everybody wants to use a stomach thing, and I say to them, but Optimum GI, you get a multivitamin mineral with the stomach support. So we're creating a healthy body. And, the healthier the body is, the happier the horse is. And happy horses have big hearts, and big hearts win. That's what I see across the board. I don't care what the discipline is. That's what happens. So that's my report, Tigger.
Thanks, Kathy. And I think Mary is on her horse is on Optimum GI, and Stephanie's horse is on Optimum GI. It's kind of if you want to build a program, Optimum GI would be the base, because it supports the GI tract and is protective, just like TheraGuard. It's just not at the therapeutic level. So if you've got an ulcer sensitive horse, it's a complete multivitamin mineral with GI tract support to protect that delicate mucosa all the way through the GI tract, all the way back to the hindgut. Do we have any questions?
I think we've pretty much gone over the questions. Amanda asked some more questions or clarification about the manure balls. Amanda, I would encourage you to email those to Tigger directly, Tigger@biostarus.com. That's definitely how she likes to start her day. So don't be shy.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can anyone? Okay. This is Katie from Colorado, and I know that I have been working with Tigger. I have a horse with severe pyloric ulcer, and he's been on Optimum GI and Theracom, and he does not get any grain. We're at about 72% healed. Should I add the TheraGuard now?
Absolutely. 100%.
Okay, and do that for 30 or 60 days?
Yes. You're 70% healed.
Yes.
We may be able to get that done in 30 days. We've been
Okay.
able to take 4 and heal them in 60 days. So
Okay.
you're at 70% after a month.
Yes, and he's on Gastrogard and Sucralfate. How when can I start getting off of the GastroGuard?
Oh,
I mean, how?
Here's the problem. Here is what we face with GastroGuard. Because it blocks the stomach acid, the production of stomach acid.
Mm-hmm.
When you reintroduce it, the body hyper reacts and produces more acid. And that's why horses relapse so quickly.
Right.
So what I would do is, you know, are you on a full tube?
Yes.
Okay, go to a half a tube for a week and a quarter tube for a week. And by that time you should have your TheraGuard, and then you can stop it and just go with TheraGuard. The sucralfate, it's, you know, it's benign. So, but you know, you may not need it with the TheraGuard.
Okay.
But you're
so first I'm going to wean him from the GastroGuard and then start the TheraGuard.
Well,
or start TheraGuard next.
I would get him down to, well, if you spend a week at a half a tube, then start the TheraGuard and bring him down to a quarter of a tube, and then stop. And you can stay with the sucralfate. It's probably not necessary.
And then always have the TriGuard on hand for going any place.
Yep.
And I'll be calling and getting the TheraGuard and TriGuard on hand, stashed in my garage. Awesome.
Thanks.
Can I answer a question?
Tigger, can I just add?
Wait, Stephanie, go ahead.
So there was a question about how to get more hydration into the horse, and I can I address that one? Because I think so. I said that I do the soak cubes because Griff never was a good drinker, and when he was going through the hindgut issues, definitely was worse. But I think the thing that I use that I really believe in is the Starlight electrolyte, or the
elixir.
Oh, well, that's the next thing I was going to talk about. But the Starlight, like, that's just part of my program. The elixir, because of who Griff is and how hard it is for him in the heat, and because he's half Frisian, anytime he has a tough ride or it's hot and he's working, going to a show, anything where he might be a little bit more stressed, the elixir is his go-to product. It is amazing. I have to be very careful with his work. If I work too hard, too long, on a typical day with good temperatures, I don't have much horse the next day. So I have to be very conscientious about that. But when there's heat involved and extreme stress, he's working hard at a show, something like that, I give him a tube of elixir. He sucks it out of the tube. He loves it. And I have a horse the next day. That product is my go-to product. And Griff loves it. Loves it, loves it, loves it.
Go ahead,
May I add something, Tigger?
Yeah.
The whole idea of weaning off the GastroGuard, and you know, GastroGuard has saved a lot of horses. So I just wanted to say it's not a bad product. I think it has gone from being a very good treatment to using it for maintenance. And I think there's a lot of kind of not, you know, I don't think it was ever meant for long-term use. So that being said, what I have found is a lot of people, now that TriGuard is out, I've said to them, look, when you want to use GastroGuard, try using TriGuard. And I've just made that suggestion. And it seems like that has really been a good thing for people, as far as in those moments they want a GastroGuard, they go to the TriGuard, and they're having really good results. So, you know, that's kind of been what I've recommended to people is, you know, because that's all we've had for so long. I've said to them, just when you think you need a GastroGuard, go with the TriGuard and see what you're feeling. And They're really, really happy with that. And it seems to work in combination, and it doesn't seem to create that backlash effect that you talked about, Tigger, and also the reducing of the corn and the things that are so hard for the stomach to break down. You talked about that a little bit, but the change of diet really seems to make a big difference, going more to an alfalfa pellet, getting away from the corn and all those grains that the body has to produce so much acid to break it down. And like you said, the alfalfa produces more saliva. So you're creating a more alkaline environment to start with. So you're not having to make that correction. And again, there's a little bit of management involved in that. And when people seem to do that, they don't have to hit them with the heavy medication as much.
And I want to read Anna's testimonial on. We'll close on that.
So Anna Howell really wanted to be here, but she had a scheduling conflict. So she did just a quick write-up of what she would have said. So now I'm Anna Howell. I'm an amateur rider who competes in both dressage and eventing. I have been using BioStar products for all of my horses since 2007. I have had my gelding Bo since he was a weanling. He is a 17 3-hand 5/8 thoroughbred 3/8 Shire cross that turned 17 this year. We have competed through 3rd level dressage, getting our bronze medal, successfully schooling 4th level, and compete at training level in eventing. He is a very happy and laid back guy at home or away, but ever since I started showing him as a 5-year-old, he would go off his feed, wouldn't eat treats, and would pin his ears while I groomed him when he was away for shows. He will always eat his hay and drinks well. He is normal under saddle and competes well. I have tried ulcer guard several times with no change in his behavior. I would start 5 days prior to travel, continue through the show, and wean him off for 3 days after the show. I tried it 3 separate times, but with no change in eating habits or grooming behavior at the shows, I stopped. I bought several tubes of TriGuard as soon as it was available. I had an event in Cheyenne, Wyoming, a 10-hour haul, and I was excited to try it out. The morning I left, I gave him a tube after he ate breakfast before hitting the road. He didn't eat or drink while in the trailer, but that is normal for him. When we arrived at the showgrounds, he was hand-walked while the stalls were being set up, and he immediately drank and ate hay. A little later that night, I fed him and he ate all his grain. That is the first time in his long show career that he has eaten all of his grain. I gave him a tube of TriGuard every morning, which he didn't mind at all. He is typically very picky. If I deworm him, he won't eat anything for at least 30 minutes. I gave him the TriGuard and immediately he continued to eat. We arrived on Thursday, showed Friday through Sunday, and traveled the 10 hours home. I gave him another tube of TriGuard every morning. He ate his grain the entire weekend, ate treats whenever I offered them, and never pinned his ears when I groomed him the entire weekend. Nice side note is that we won our division out of over 30 riders. I ordered the 12-pack of TriGuard as soon as I got home and will never put a horse in a trailer without giving them a tube first. I also use Elixir, BioStar's recovery paste, every night when I'm traveling with my horses.
Thank you, Anna.
Awesome.
So if we don't have any other questions, I want to thank Stephanie and Cathy and Mary for joining me on the panel about ulcers, and thank you for all your experiences, and thank you for working with me and teaching me and letting your horses teach me. So thank you very much, and good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Good night. Thank you.
Night. Thanks.
Bye. See you guys next time.
Tigger.